There we go. Okay. Thank you for the reminder. Let me go back to these and these. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to actually back up a sec, and I'm just going to go real quick through some of the stuff that I already said, just because I don't want to have folks have missed if they come to, if they come to look at some of this information later. So real super fast. Boom. News literacy, free resources. We're going to get into them. Here's the link. Here's the QR code. You can get the whole deck. It's got links. You can follow them. Here's who I am. You don't care. Doesn't matter. It's News Literacy Week going on right now. NLP has some great programs happening all week long, including tonight, but especially for the next several nights. So you can check those out. They've got the whole list right here. You can see what's going on virtually versus in person. They've got a really cool thing going on in DC. I kind of wish I was down there, but I'm not. I'm here, but I'm glad that I'm here because I want to share with you. And news literacy matters because it's incredibly important for our students who are living in an information age and an information economy, because they get a lot of their information from online sources and spend an average, in 2022, spent an average of 91 minutes a day on TikTok. They're getting a lot more of their information there these days. And it's not just kids that are getting their information online. We've seen people who have died because they got bad information online. And we have research that shows that disinformation and misinformation spread faster than the truth online. And so, okay, this story, the litter box story that wouldn't die, fascinates me because it started out as a rumor that got picked up by different politicians and different news sources and just kept growing and growing and growing. And even when it was debunked, it kept coming back over and over and over again. It was reported on national news, but then it was debunked on national news, but it still keeps coming back, right? And so this is from several years ago. And here's the thing. So it started back in 2021 and it was still around in 2022. And not only was it still around in 2021, 2022, it's still here. It's still going on. This past week, we had a politician who is using that story to pass laws. So some of this stuff, even though it gets debunked, keeps coming back. Because we don't have strong information literacy and news literacy, we're not always completely aware of what's the truth and what's not. And it's very easy for those kinds of things to continue to linger. So we've got to think some about where we're sending students and how we're helping students learn to look at information and news particularly. And here's the thing that News Literacy Project tries to point out. Trained journalists have reporting standards. The guy yelling about things that he hates online doesn't. And those journalistic standards are incredibly important for helping students understand what they should be looking at, how they should be looking at things, how they should be assessing what they find. So how do we prepare our students? News Literacy Project can totally help you out with this. They have so many awesome resources that can help you get your students up and running on this. So I'm going to tell you that I consider myself an information literacy professional. I spent years writing and teaching a course that dealt very specifically with helping students learn about information literacy. And I have since then gone through some of NLP's materials and recently just did one of their training courses. And even having looked at their materials, going through their training course recently has helped me even further rethink some important concepts and some of the ways that I think about news literacy, some of the ways that I plan to teach news literacy, and the ways that I think we should be talking to and presenting to our students when we discuss news. So one of the things I really like about News Literacy Project's approach is that they focus on info zones. They try to get us to think about what is the type of information we're looking at. And so they break it down into 6 info zones. And there's a whole lesson on this that students can do. So the first type of information might be raw information, stuff that like we've got a recording from a camera. There's no commentary, there's no editing, it's just the raw footage. Could be any kind of data that hasn't been manipulated or cleaned up. That's your raw information. So that is different than when we get news, because news has a specific definition. It's not just straight information. It's information that's been selected, it's been checked, it's been verified, and it's gone through some processes to make sure that it is being presented in as much of a bias-free way as possible. Opinions often get conflated with news, especially in a lot of online sources where you might have someone who reported on a story making commentary about that story as well. So opinion, definitely not the same as news, follows different rules, has different purposes. There's also propaganda. And we're seeing a lot of propaganda in a lot of different places, especially in the news lately, because of some of the conflicts that are going on around the world. And it's not limited to what's going on in current events. Obviously, propaganda is a topic that our students learn a lot about in social studies class as well. But it's something that it's a different category of information than news or opinion. It's got a different purpose to it. Advertising, again, different purpose. It's bringing us information, but it's bringing us information in a very specific way, right? It's trying to very specifically slant our perceptions of things. And then there's entertainment, information that's not necessarily meant to be taken at face value. It may include some actual current event news information, but it's being used for entertainment purposes rather than trying to convey that information in an unbiased way. So when we get new information, we want to try and get our students to think about what info zone does this fall into? Because if it doesn't fall into a news zone, we've got to look at it in a very different way. And if it does fall into a news zone, we've got to look at it to see, is it reliable, right? So let's try it out. And I'm going to ask you to throw your thoughts and ideas into the chat as we go here. So here is a piece of information. Now, we can look at this information. Based on this graphic, based on this information, what conclusions might you draw about gun deaths in Florida? And throw some thoughts into the chat. Let's see what we come up with. So folks looking at the chart, looking at this graph, are saying, okay, we've got this point in the graph that says Florida enacted its stand your ground law, and at that point, the bar goes down, right? So that's what we're seeing. So it looks like deaths decreased after Florida passed its stand your ground law, right? Now, let's look at this a little closer. Check out this axis. And check out the source of this information. And check out the fact that it was reported by Reuters, which is generally considered a very reliable news source. Now, it looks like when we look at this, when I first saw this graph, when it was first introduced to me, I thought, oh, okay, 2005, Stand Your Ground Law. Stand Your Ground Law, by the way, a law that I'm going to really roughly paraphrase. It basically says if you're in the state of Florida and you feel threatened by someone coming at you, you are allowed to shoot to kill. You're allowed to shoot them. You can stand your ground. So when they passed that law, looks like those deaths dropped off, right? Looks like number of murders committed using firearms went down. But if you look at the axis, you realize actually the axis is upside down. And so after they passed that law, gun deaths went up, way up, real fast. And then I saw that the source was the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, reported in Reuters. And I said to myself, so the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which has an interest in making it look like its laws make sense, published a graph that uses an upside down axis that most people probably aren't going to catch, because I know I didn't catch it at first, right? Now, here's the thing. I found out much, much, much later. In fact, not that long ago, I found out that there's more context to this. The creator of this graphic took data from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and created this graphic to represent dripping blood. So while the data is from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and it was published in Reuters, it was also very specifically manipulated to create a very specific image in our heads. This idea of dripping blood. So when you know that context, it kind of makes you rethink a little bit why it is the way it is and what it's trying to do. So here's my question to you. Is this graphic raw information? Is it news? Is it opinion? Is it propaganda? Is it advertising? Or is it entertainment? Toss your answer in the chat. So we got several folks thinking that it's propaganda, a couple of folks thinking advertising. Before I told you the context, is there anybody who would have said that this was maybe news? I'll tell you, before I had the full context, I was thinking of it as news. But when I got more context, I started thinking opinion or propaganda. And it's not super clear what category it falls into just by itself. And we're very rarely going to come across a piece of infographic just standing by itself. It's usually going to be part of a larger piece, right? So as we're thinking about what category this might fall into, we also need to think a little bit about how it fits in. So one of the comments is that would not have said news, always want the full context and information. I agree 100%. We've got to think about where is this coming from? What is this a part of, right? So the info zone or the context affects how we see the information. So we've got to think about what's the bigger picture that this might be part of. And when we think about that, it's going to affect how we are processing what we're seeing. Because if I told you that this was an art piece from the beginning, it probably would have made you look at it a little bit differently than if it was just if you were expecting it to just be a straight up graph, right? So one of the things that I like about the News Literacy Project's ideas and resources is that they try very hard to avoid the minefield that is talking about news literacy, because a lot of people have connected news literacy to partisanship and have said if you're teaching kids news literacy, you're teaching them that certain news outlets are better than other news outlets, and that's political and that's partisan. And NLP says, well, no, what we're trying to do is we're trying to think about what are the kinds of information that students might come across, because they need to understand that there are different kinds of information, because different kinds of information affect how we're going to look at it. And they also focus on the importance of reliable information, because no matter where you fall on whatever scale or guide you want, we all can agree that having solid information is important, that having good information is incredibly valuable. NLP acknowledges that we all have biases. And the thing I like about how NLP considers biases is that they even have this really nice graphic to help you talk about it. We tend to think of bias as being partisan, especially these days. We tend to think of bias just being as which side of the political aisle are you on? But there's actually several different kinds or several different types of biases. And there's also some forms that these biases might take. So ways that those biases might be introduced into whatever kind of information we're looking at, whether it's news or not. So those are things that we want to have in mind. So we're not saying we're trying to point kids to a specific kind of source. We're trying to say, here are things to look for when you're looking at information, some things to have in mind. NLP also plays very heavily into looking at and pointing out that journalism, good quality journalism, has standards that they're supposed to follow. And reliable news sources are more likely to follow those journalistic standards than sources that are not as reliable. So being aware that the standards exist and what they are can also help us kind of share with students, here are some things to bear in mind when you're looking at information, especially when you're looking at information and news online. NLP offers some ways to look at and ways to look for information. And what I love is that they acknowledge that there's overlap across subjects when we talk about news literacy. Some of the things that I love from them are reverse image searches. Something I learned about from them is a reverse image search, which I'll get into a little later. And they also offer tips on how to Google like a pro. And they actually talked to Cindy Otis, a former CIA analyst, and some other experts. And they put together this awesome infographic to give you some real quick down and dirty tips for if you're going to use online search engines, here are some tools you can use to make sure you're getting better information. And they talk about why this is a good thing to do when you're looking for news, particularly in some of their lessons. So they offer lots of great things. Now, I'm going to start with probably the easiest, quickest thing to implement that NLP offers, and that is their newsletter, which is called The Sift, and they deliver it each week to your email. Their new one just came out today. It includes current events and examples. It includes links to additional resources. It's got a cool part called the Rumor Guard Rundown, which I love, and it's got kickers at the end. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. So you can sign up for it here for free, and here's the latest one. And they've got some information on Taylor Swift in here, so we know that this is going to hit with our students, right? But they've got this great visual, and then they've got some information. And so they're talking here about climate change deniers and how the strategies that they use have changed over time. And if you look at where they were in 2018 versus where they are now, the percentage of ways that they have tried to sort of push people away from acknowledging climate change, instead of saying global warming isn't happening, that has dropped off significantly over the past 5 years. Instead, one of the main things they're looking at is climate solutions won't work. And so let's just keep doing what we're doing. So it's kind of interesting to see this is what the data is showing in terms of how these operators are working online. And they've got notes about this. They've got discussion questions that you can use with students if you wanted. There's resources to help you talk about scientific claims. They've got related links to news stories that discuss this. So right there, you could use this for a whole lesson. This could be a quick class starter, or you could dive into it real deep. You could just give it to kids and have them play with it, or you could lead them through it as a class. So that's one of the elements in this week's. Then they've also got anti-science movement continuing to grow in the US. And again, they've got some further links and information about this, discussion questions. And then we've got local news organizations, which incredibly important for getting good information. And yet they're facing major funding hurdles. And so here's another real quick, real easy way you could bring some of this information to students to discuss and to dig into in some deeper ways. There's also the Rumor Guard Rundown, which I love. So they usually will find something that is not true, a viral image that has been going around for the past week, or in the past week, and they grab that and they make sure that they watermark it real well so somebody doesn't take it from them and use it as incorrect information. But they show you this thing that's popular and going around, and they talk about what the problem is. And what I love is they've got no's and yeses, right? So no, this is not an authentic photo. Yes, this is a picture of Taylor Swift from 2019. Yes, this image appears to show celebrities wearing political shirts getting more common today, right? So it gives you here's what's wrong with this and here's what's right with this and why that might be confusing or difficult to follow. And then again, they've got links within their discussion here that you can share with students or dig into more for more information from different sources online, more topics to discuss within the topic, right? And here's another one: viral video shared with false proof of voter fraud at Iowa caucus. So it's not an example of fraud, even though it's been passed around as though it is. And again, it talks about what was not correct about this, but what was correct. Caucus participants were required to verify their local residence, right? So that was true, but the rest of this was not. And they also have these kickers, which are just short little bits of things that you might want to discuss or have like a conversation about with students. I don't know if you heard that New Hampshire voters recently got an AI generated phone call from President Biden, except it wasn't. It was AI generated. So they had to disclaim that. They had to go, the press secretary was recently debunking that. So there's a whole bunch of different ones, some that might hit particularly depending on a topic that you're talking about with students that you might want to bring in to a class, and it gives you the chance to rate. And not only do they have the current one, but they also offer you their archived ones as well. So you can actually sort of go back in time and see some of their other topics if there's something that might particularly hit with your students that you want to get into, right? So that's their newsletter. Super easy, but so full of resources. They've also got a podcast, which maybe you've got students who are more auditorially focused, or maybe you are better with audio rather than the text. That's great. So they've got this podcast, and it's called Is That a Fact? They've got several seasons up. They're in season 3. Season 4 is coming soon. And they tend to run about half hour, 45 minutes, depending. They've got all sorts of different experts that they talk to. They're about different elements of news literacy. So there's a lot of different ways that these can offer some sort of inroads to our students or to ourselves as we're thinking about these different topics. So we got a newsletter, we got podcasts, super easy to use, super quick. All you got to do is just go to them and use them. And you can sign up for the newsletter so you'll get it regularly. You can sign up for the podcast on your podcatcher and it'll automatically be in your feed. But there's so much more. Those are just 2 of the resources. I've got 2 separate pages of educator tools here because there's so many of them. So Checkology is actually amazing. It's this set of lessons that you can set up a class within. So you can, like, if you've got a roster of students, you can add a roster of students to Checkology, and then you can assign lessons to them. These are all pre-made lessons that you can customize, you can rearrange, you can add, take out, you can rearrange what's there. Some of it has self-grading quiz elements. It's got lots of video elements. It's all interactive. It asks the students to write answers and to click on which one of these is the right thing based on what we just saw in the last 3 slides or the last 3 screens. So it's really interactive and engaging with the students. And you can do those as whole class units, or you can do them as just individual, each kid work on it. They also can see a leaderboard of how they're doing for points for lessons. So if you like that competitive, if you've got the competitive students, they can kind of rank themselves and see how they're doing. I'll get into the Checkology stuff in a little bit. There's also some amazing resources. Each one of these you can click on to see more stuff. They've got resources that you can just like print out and use. All sorts of different kinds of things. Again, I'll come back to that. We just talked about the newsletter, the SIFT. They've got this amazing program, Newsroom to Classroom, that I find just so fascinating. And I haven't had a chance to execute it yet, but I really, really want to do it. They find local journalists, vetted journalists, to come and talk to your students, or to virtually or in person talk to your students about journalism and news literacy. Talk about having an amazing expert in the room, right? So we've got that. We've also got the Newslit Nation Insider, which is an email you can use with your classes. It's a little bit different than the SIFT, but it's got some of the same basic concepts in it. There's also pre-made professional learning. They've got online and in person. They've got some pre-recorded lessons that you can go in and do. Their Newslit Camp is coming up real soon, which is a day-long way of learning about local journalism and how news is important to our daily lives, and the podcast that we talked about. So lots and lots of stuff. Now, the Checkology stuff, I was telling you about the lessons. I was trying to screenshot so you could see the lessons, but there are 7 or 8 or 9 screens, each of which has this many lessons on it. I mean, there's so many different things that you can dig into, and you can use them individually. You can use them in conjunction. they're really, really something. They are free, they're high quality, they've got professional experts that provide information within and to each of the lessons. They're customizable, they're interactive for the students to be using as they go through it. So it's not just, okay, I'm going to sit here and click through the things. Like they've got to actually be engaged and involved in what's going on. You can assign them. So you can actually say, I want these students to do this, or I want this group of students to do this. And I've got this other group of students that I'm going to have do something different. So you can actually set them up. And like I said, they've got some self-grading elements to them. Some of them have written passages that you would have to go in and look at, but some of them have like different kinds of multiple choicey kinds of things, or order in the correct way in order to get your points. So the kids can actually kind of play with those in a lot of different ways. And I do mean play, because let's say here's so I've got a class here, right? I'll even show you. I could literally spend days just going through all the stuff that they have here. So I'm just going to try and do super quick here. But I can set up a class for my period 4 class, and I can choose what kind of students are these. Are they middle school, high school, higher ed, non-US? I've got middle school. I can choose the grade level. So this is going to be for my 8th graders. And I can choose a subject. Now, some of these lessons go really well with particular subjects. Some are just generalized. So if I'm a civics teacher, a government teacher, history teacher, social science teacher, those have some specific lessons that can be applied to your existing curriculum or to your existing standards. Same thing for English ELA, journalism. There's also library media studies. So if for the librarians out there, there you go. There's science and there's technology. There's a STEM series of lessons. There's other. So I'm going to say for me, I'm going to be doing library media studies. Course lock is whether or not you are making the students do the lessons in a particular order, or if they're allowed to just jump around and do them in whatever order they want, right? So I'll leave that on for now. I'll create the class. And once it's done creating my class, I can add students to it by adding a roster, or I can give them a code and they put in the code and then they're added to the class, or I can add them myself, right? So I'm going to go back. I can assign the course. So now I get to pick, well, what is it that I want to give these kids, right? So Checkology for middle school makes sense because it kind of gives basically an overview of how this is going to go. So we're going to call this period 4 Checkology. And I'm not going to worry about start with the preset. So here is what's currently in the course. Starts with info zones, which I mentioned before, and it goes through, again, some exercises. There's lessons, there's exercises, and it comes preset with them in this particular order. There's a challenge within it that the students are kind of challenged to try something out. I can drag and drop these to rearrange them. I can come over here. Here's 44 other lessons that I can drag in and add wherever I want within the existing order of the one that they've given me. So it's super flexible and it's super powerful. I can choose, you know what, 15 items, too many for my kids. I'm going to knock it down to 5. And I can just say, you know what, we're not going to get to the argument and evidence lesson. We're not going to get to branded content. We're going to get rid of add or not. So I'm just knocking down how many things are going to be in here. And then the students only have those to do. Or I can say, you know what, I'm really interested in them learning more about algorithms. So I'm going to put algorithms in here. And let's see. I also am really interested in conspiratorial thinking. I think they're going to find that interesting too. So I'm going to add that in. I'm just dragging it. I'm dropping it. There it is. I can come in and get some extensions. So maybe I think for the info zones, they need a couple of additional reminders because they're going to have one about school lunch, but maybe I want to give them some other topics or I want to replace that one with something else. There's also some other exercises they can do in here. So I can choose, like, look at how much stuff. I've got challenges, I've got fact checks, all these different things that I can utilize as part of this lesson, and I get to decide. And once I'm done, I can assign it. And as students join the class, boom, it's there for them. They go right into it. So powerful. So many options, so many abilities here. In addition to all of that, there is also a resource library that you can go into, and it has lessons that you can use that aren't necessarily, you could, if you don't want to do an interactive lesson, you want to use the ideas that they have, but you want to do it in your own way, they've got lessons that you can use that don't have to be interactive. You can look at it by grade levels. They go basically through lower middle up through high school and beyond. If you know that it's not so much a lesson that you want, but you really want an activity for them to do, they've got activities already done that you can go and use. You want infographics and posters to show them stuff real quick. Done. Quizzes. Done. There you go. Instructional supports. They're going to help you. Done. They're handing you the keys to the kingdom here. It's really as easy as just going over to their site. We can come over here. And if I want to look at their quizzes, here we go. Easiest quiz of all time. And I can open it up. I can download it. I can go through it with the kids. And all they got to do is go through bit by bit. Click, click, click. Finish this iconic film quote. What's going to go here? Is it Luke, I am your father? No, I am your father. Yes, I am your father. Or baby, I am your father. If anybody chooses D, I'm going to be a little sad, right? Ah, not Luke. It's no. And you can look it up. And that's one of the fun things. Like some of these seem like they're so obvious. In the original animated Snow White, what famous phrase activates the queen's mirror? Mirror, mirror on the wall? Magic mirror on the wall? Pretty mirror on the wall? My mirror on the wall. We've got a difference of opinion. I would have said A. Magic mirror on the wall. And again, this is just something to sort of, this one's great for just getting a discussion going, right? Things that we think we know. What accessory does Monopoly mascot Rich Uncle Pennybags wear? Sunglasses, pocket watch, monocle, none of the above. I think this one's monocle. Oh, it's none of the above, but he does have a top hat, mustache, and cane. Man, I am just failing on all fronts here on this quiz. But you can see that this would be like a fun way to sort of start some different conversations about how we think we've got these answers that are stuck in our heads that we've seen a million places. And they don't have to be like, there's also ones that are a little more advanced, right? We've got, can you make sense of data? We've got vetting news sources, avoiding conspiratorial thinking. These are all quizzes that they can take to help them see if they understand the key concepts behind them. And these infographics, I love them, right? Breaking news checklist. 6 things to know about AI. Tell me that there's not a ton of us that could really get some use out of 6 things to know about AI. Not objective or reliably factual. It's not all bad. Easier to create than ever, easier to fake than ever. Signals change in the nature of evidence, something that we should think about. Reputable sources matter more than ever, right? It's a super easy way to just, again, have something that you can stick on the wall as a reminder, as a refresher. We've got, sorry, I clicked out of my infographics and posters here. They've got all different kinds of ways to kind of, they got the Google with Pro, Google like a pro, arguments and evidence, like lots of different tools that we can show our students to help them think about some of these important issues. Right? So this is showing the summary. Let me download the resource. And here's the poster, right? Very visually, grabbing us visually with lots of bright colors, lots of broken down pieces to make it easy to follow. How cool would that be hanging on a wall just as a reminder? Right? So These are all free resources. You can print them out, use them however you want to use them, wherever you want to use them. The instructional supports, they've got unit plan, they've got grade band expectations, and a framework for teaching news literacy. I'm going to come back to that in a sec. So these are really awesome. You like standards? Well, we got standards. They call it a framework for teaching news literacy. Basically, it's standards. So when you come over here, let's look at the resource. They've got, let's look at the Google Doc because it's a little easier to see than the PDF. So they've got this Google Doc and it breaks down. Here's their first step. Here's the understandings, essential questions. What's the skill transfer? What are the acquisitions we hope students will be able to do? What are the goals? Right? And so it's broken down in this language that we all recognize and understand, that we could bring to an administrator, that we could bring to a department and say, look, this matches a lot of the stuff that you're already doing. And they've got it all laid out, and they've got it so that it's hyperlinked so that you can come in and go right to these different lessons or these different pieces of information. So they make it super easy to utilize this stuff. They've also got grade band indicators, which I love because, again, let's go over to the downloads. So you can see what it's going to look like. We're teaching different grades. So that's fine. We're teaching different grades. So we've got the first standard, and then we've got it broken down by grades. So if you're working with the younger kids, while most of their materials are focused more in the middle school and high school, they are working on some stuff for the lower grades, and they do offer some suggestions on ways to sort of incorporate this into some of the lower grade work as well. So pre-K, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, right? And they talk about here's how this is connected. So that's what the big picture idea that they're trying to get across, and some ways to start thinking about it. Already done, already ready to go, right? So if you like grade bands, we got it. You like unit plans? We got your unit plans right here. They've got this awesome, already set up, ready to go unit plan for teaching news literacy for grade levels 3 to 6. About 3 weeks worth of time. Designed by News Literacy Project and Time for Kids. Now, you probably, 3 weeks, it's a lot of time. Maybe you don't have that kind of time with your students, but they've got some real nicely laid out ideas for how you can go about this. Look at this. They've got your media literacy scavenger hunt set up and ready to go. Like, you can look through here, you can pick out the elements that work for you. If you haven't listened to It's Corn, you really need to. The Corn Kid, amazing. So funny. So they've got all these elements, and they've got like vocabulary. They've got something called word walls that they include in the lesson, so that you can click on the, in the Checkology lesson, click on the word wall. There's all your key terms defined. Easy for the kids to see, easy for you to see. All laid out and ready to go. They've got exit tickets already set up and ready to go. And like, you can, again, pick and choose the things that work for you. They're hyperlinked to the resources that are on NLP already. So if you want to use what they've got, you're ready to go. And if you want to just use it as a thinking exercise, as a way to kind of consider, how might I approach this? They've got a laid out idea that you can kind of build from or build off of without having to start from scratch. And that's the thing that really kills me, is I spent so much time building so many things. I spent literally years building different lessons, and NLP actually has a bunch of lessons already ready to go. And here's something that's new. They just added this professional learning where you can get a certificate and a digital badge to be a news literacy educator. I just took these courses. They are so good. You can do them whenever you've got the time, self-paced. They are online, so they're easy to access. They are free. And when you're done, you've learned a lot of stuff. Like I said, I thought I knew a lot of stuff. I learned quite a few things, or had to at least rethink some of the things I thought I knew. So they're really well designed, and they're really well designed for anybody who's trying to learn about these topics. You could theoretically have students work with these, but they're really meant for educators. But they've got built-in checks to see, did you actually follow along with that? Did you understand what they were talking about? You've got to like take little quizzes and you got to pass them. And it's a really great way to sort of build some additional knowledge and build some skills that maybe you didn't realize were a little less up to date than you thought they were. So I've mentioned this before. I spent a lot of time trying to get information literacy and news literacy into my middle school classes. And I actually did end up using several things straight from NLP. Yes, great for PD days when we're let loose on our own. News literacy project, those self-paced courses, amazing. You can do them in just a little bit at a time. You don't have to necessarily do them all at once. Each module, there's three or four modules that are around 2 hours each, three modules, and like one of them's like a hour and a half, and then there's a little bit of a half-hour final part. But within those 2 hour, 1.5 hour, they're broken into smaller subsections. So you can do some, it'll remember where you left off, and when you come back, you can pick up from there. So I used this lesson from Checkology as part of one of the lessons I built. I built a lesson on misleading information, and I used from Checkology the idea of reverse image searches. So I didn't know until I saw this in Checkology that you can actually go onto like, let's say you're looking at, I don't know if this will work. I'm just doing this on the fly, so we're going to see what happens. But if I'm looking at a site and I see a picture and I'm curious about that picture, where it came from, if I'm in Google Chrome, I can right click on the picture, and one of the options is search image with Google. And when I do that, it's going to find other places that this picture has been used. If there are other places this image has been used, it's also going to find me similar images. And so if I'm trying to decide whether the picture I'm looking at is a real picture or not, I can right click it and I can use it, search image with Google, and it's going to look and see. And the reason, let me back up for a second. The reason I used it with this particular image, so this is a news report that was talking about child soldiers in an African country conflict. And this image that they used in the news story is actually an image from a video game. But it ran on the news as an actual real image. And if they had just done the reverse image search, they would have seen, oh, no, that's not actually a real thing. You might remember this from a couple of years back. It was 2021 when Texas was getting that incredible cold snap for the first time in decades, if not hundreds of years. And there were a lot of people online that were saying, oh, man, Texas is losing all its power because of this cold snap, because they are forcing Texas to get rid of their gas and coal plants and forcing them to use renewable resources. And these stupid renewable resources just fail when it gets cold, like these wind turbines in Texas that froze up, and then people lost power. And some people were commenting online. They had this picture. They were saying, here's this picture from Texas when they were de-icing this turbine. And I bet you that de-icer isn't made out of something that's renewable. I bet you that's not great. And so you can see these are actually real comments that were online. Well, here's the interesting thing. If you do a reverse image search on this particular image, and I don't think it's going to let me do it from within my slide deck, unfortunately, but if you do a reverse image search on there, here we go. It actually turns out that while it was used as helicopter de-icing Texas wind turbine, it actually wasn't from Texas, and it wasn't from 2021. It was from Sweden in 2019. But it was taken out of context and used as part of basically some propaganda to try and get people to move away from natural renewables. So there are easy things we can do, but we've got to know they exist. And News Literacy Project makes it super easy not only to learn about those things, but to share those things with your students as well. So I would argue that if one of our roles as educators, whether we're in the classroom, whether we're in the library, whether we're administrators, wherever we are in the educational process, we should be helping our students learn good digital citizenship because they are living in a digital world. And having news literacy is part of being a good digital citizen because we need we need citizens who can differentiate between reliable and unreliable news sources. We need citizens who understand click hygiene, not just automatically clicking retweet because, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, click, 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 or not just automatically clicking on everything that is put to them as being true and assuming that it's true, and making sure that they're citing their sources when they are using information, when they're sharing information, when they're looking at information to see what is being cited so that they know whether it's reliable or not. When they're doing those things, they're building up good digital citizenship. They're being good digital citizens. They're also reducing cases of misinformation going around. So if we can teach them to be good digital citizens, we're also reducing misinformation that's in our ecosystem. I think both of those are really important skills that we need to think something about. So one of the things I love about NLP's lessons is that they are very cross-disciplinary, and some of them are really well designed and even packaged to go with particular topics or subjects, I should say. So like social studies, they actually, a lot of this goes along with a lot of social studies and history standards. And they've kind of put together a little grouping that works really well for social studies classes that goes with standards that kind of are more or less national or that will certainly fit a lot of different kinds of standards. So this is something that social studies teachers could use, whether or not the library is using them, whether or not ELA is using them. Checkology lessons and NLP resources can really be very specifically used by some of the social studies teachers. But that's not all, because we've also got a set of lessons that go really well with ELA, kind of helping kids think about editing, because news should have an editor. And what does an editor do and how does editing work? And thinking about what that means for writing, both for when they write and for when they're helping to edit other people's work, right? They've got lessons on argument and evidence. Tell me that's not incredibly important for our ELA kids, especially when we're going to try and teach them persuasive writing. They've got to think about, why should people listen to me? What's my evidence? How am I going to use different kinds of arguments to persuade them, right? We've got elements of looking at different kinds of info zones, because for the students in ELA, they read all different kinds of pieces, and they should hopefully be able to think about the fact that when you're reading different kinds of texts, you have to use different kinds of analysis or different kinds of thought processes. You're not going to read nonfiction the same way you're going to read a fiction story, just to take the two biggest categories, right? And then even within those, you're going to read a mystery story differently than you're going to read a romance. You're going to read a narrative nonfiction piece differently than you're going to read browsable nonfiction, right? So helping them think about the information they take in going into different kinds of categories, incredibly helpful. We've also got some stuff that goes with STEM. I hadn't realized, I'm always ready to call out my own ignorance, and I was completely ignorant of the fact that there's so much, that there are science standards, next generation science standards that deal specifically with media and information literacy, because there's a lot of science media out there, and that's one of the specific standards for the next gen science standards. So your science teachers, you should absolutely be talking to them, working with them on ways that they can increase their students' understanding of and consideration of what are the different ways that we need to think about science information when it comes to us, especially online. And again, they've got some real specific lessons and resources that can be used from NLP that are going to fit right in with the STEM lessons. So those are just a couple of the ways that that's going to fit in with some of the different subjects that you have. And all of it is free, $0. It's really incredible. It's really amazing that they're giving that out. So there's a bunch of awesome NLP stuff out there. There's a couple of other things that maybe would be useful that I threw in here too. One, so NLP's got TikTok. You like TikTok? They got TikTok. There's a great way to get your students real quick and easy engaged in a quick little here's something to think about. Here's a quick little lesson that we can all kind of enjoy and get into. Quick little video, right? So they've got a TikTok channel. They've got some other resources as well, but these are not necessarily News Literacy Project. These are some other news literacy resources that I find really interesting, or information literacy resources. Factitious is fun. It's a game where you've got to try and decide, is this a real headline or is this made up? And some of them are real hard. Some, it's really tough to tell which ones are the real story, which ones are made up stories. Bad news is fun because the students get to pretend to be a bad guy and learn how disinformation spreads in social media by pretending to be a bad guy trying to spread misinformation. So it's kind of fun. Go Viral, similar kind of idea. So there's a couple of different of these game sort of styles of learning opportunities online, interactive learning. There's also this great podcast, Science Versus, that I really enjoy. It's basically every week they talk about some sort of usually current event issue that deals with science and health and medicine. And they look at what's the actual science behind some of the claims that are going on. And they've got a list of citations at the end of every episode that usually runs around 100 citations for a 30-minute episode. It's really something. They do a great job of researching. And it's a great tool for kind of showing the students this can be engaging and interesting, and also very factually based, and use good research to back up what's being learned about. It's not always, the language isn't always school appropriate, so you want to preview episodes, but I find it just fascinating, and I think there's some really great ones that could be used with classes. So 7:59, that brings us in right at the wire. If anybody's got thoughts or questions, please do feel free to add them to the chat. I'm happy to try and answer them. If something comes to you later and you want to follow up with me, there's my contact info. Feel free to reach out. I love touching base with folks and sharing thoughts and ideas. So I think that's just about everything. And
I just wanted to say, Steve, thank you so much. This will be really helpful. I'm going to put it in my Google Classroom. I created a Google Classroom for my teachers to join for any new things that come up in technology or library media. So I'm definitely going to put the resources, Checkology in there, and the resource library. I think it will really help them out,
awesome.
especially the middle school. So
Oh,
thank you
yeah.
so much. I appreciate that.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad that you think it's going to be useful to them. I think there's so many great opportunities within what they've got on offer there. So hopefully between you and the teachers, the kids are going to get some great instruction as they learn about this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So folks, like I said, feel free to reach out. Have a great night. Hopefully I'll see you at one of NJZL's upcoming PD events as well. But if not, doesn't matter, because I hope you're having a great one anyway. Be safe, be well, stay warm, everybody.
Okay, have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.